It was a cold, stormy night in November when Emily found herself alone in her family's large Victorian house. Her parents had left for a weekend getaway, leaving her with the family dog, Max, to keep her company. At 17, Emily was used to being alone and didn't mind the solitude, but tonight felt different. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and making the old house creak. Emily settled on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and a scary movie. Max lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to listen to the storm. The movie was just reaching its climax when there was a loud knock at the front door. Emily jumped, spilling popcorn everywhere. Max barked and ran to the door, his tail wagging cautiously. Who could that be at this hour? Emily wondered, glancing at the clock. It was almost midnight. She muted the TV and approached the door slowly. "Who is it?" she called out, trying to sound braver than she felt. There was no answer. Max barked again, this time more insistently. Emily peeked through the peephole but saw nothing but darkness. Probably just some kids playing a prank, she muttered to herself. She decided to ignore it and returned to the couch, resuming her movie. But the knocking came again, louder this time. Max growled, his fur standing on end. Emily's heart raced. She grabbed her phone and called her parents, but they didn't answer. Great, she thought. Just great. Determined to find out what was going on, she grabbed a flashlight and opened the front door, Max by her side. The cold wind rushed in, making her shiver. She shone the flashlight around but saw no one. "Hello?" she called out into the night. There was no response, just the sound of the wind and rain. Emily closed the door and locked it, feeling uneasy. She decided to check the rest of the house, just to be sure. With Max following closely, she went room by room, making sure all the windows and doors were locked. Everything seemed fine until she reached the back of the house. The kitchen window was slightly open, just enough for someone to slip through. Emily's heart pounded as she closed and locked it. I must have forgotten to lock it earlier, she told herself, trying to stay calm. But a nagging feeling told her that something wasn't right. As she turned to leave the kitchen, she caught a glimpse of a shadow moving in the hallway. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice trembling. Max barked and ran toward the shadow, but it disappeared before her eyes. Emily's hands shook as she dialed 911. The operator assured her that the police were on their way and told her to stay on the line. Emily clutched the phone, her eyes darting around the dark house. She could hear Max growling in the living room, but she was too scared to move. Within minutes, flashing lights illuminated the front yard. Emily rushed to the door and let the officers in, explaining what had happened. They searched the house thoroughly, but found no sign of an intruder. "It's possible it was just the storm playing tricks on you," one of the officers suggested. Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The officers promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood and left, assuring her that she could call if she needed anything. Feeling slightly reassured, Emily locked the door and sat down with Max. She was about to call it a night when she remembered something her parents had mentioned about a hidden room in the house. It was a family secret, a small storage space behind the bookshelf in the study. Curious and a little desperate for a distraction, she decided to check it out. She moved the bookshelf aside, revealing a small door. Max sniffed at it, his tail wagging nervously. Emily took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside, she found a dusty, cobweb-covered room filled with old furniture and boxes. It looked like no one had been in there for years. As she explored the room, she noticed a stack of old family photos and letters. She picked up one of the letters and began to read. It was from her great-grandmother, describing strange occurrences in the house. "Sometimes I hear knocking at the door when no one is there, and once I saw a shadowy figure in the hallway," the letter read. Emily's blood ran cold. These were the same things she had experienced. She read on, discovering that her great-grandmother had suspected the house was haunted by the spirit of a former resident who had died under mysterious circumstances. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Emily decided to perform a small cleansing ritual she had seen online. She gathered some candles and sage, and with Max by her side, she began to walk through the house, reciting a cleansing prayer. As she entered the living room, the temperature dropped suddenly and she felt a cold breeze brush past her. The candles flickered, and Max barked furiously at something behind her. Emily turned and saw the shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway. Her heart pounded as she continued to recite the prayer. holding the sage in front of her like a shield. The figure moved closer, and Emily could feel an overwhelming sense of dread. But she didn't stop. She kept repeating the prayer, her voice growing stronger with each word. Finally, the figure stopped and began to fade. Emily's fear was replaced by a sense of determination. She took a step forward, continuing the prayer until the figure disappeared completely. The temperature returned to normal and the candle stopped flickering. Max calmed down and wagged his tail, looking up at Emily with relief in his eyes. She collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but relieved. She knew that whatever had been haunting the house was gone, at least for now. The next morning, Emily's parents returned and she told them everything that had happened. They were skeptical but supportive, promising to look into the history of the house and maybe bring in a professional to perform a proper cleansing. As the days passed, the house felt lighter, and the strange occurrences stopped. Emily knew she had faced something truly terrifying, but she had also found a strength within herself she never knew existed. Life returned to normal, and Emily felt a new sense of appreciation for her home and her family. She knew that no matter what happened, she had the courage to face it head-on. And as for the shadowy figure, Emily hoped it had finally found peace. But every now and then, on stormy nights, she would hear a faint knock at the door and remember the night she faced her fears and won. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway for 5 friends. Sarah, Jake, Emily, Ben, and Alex had been planning this camping trip for months, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. They chose a secluded campground deep in the forest, far from any signs of civilization. The site was known for its stunning scenery and serene atmosphere, perfect for unwinding and reconnecting with nature. The group arrived on a Friday afternoon, their car loaded with camping gear, food, and high spirits. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees as they set up their tents and prepared a fire. Laughter echoed through the woods as they shared stories and roasted marshmallows, the flames dancing and crackling in the cool evening air. As night fell, the dense forest around them seemed to close in, the sounds of wildlife growing louder. Despite the isolation, the friends felt a sense of peace, confident that they were alone in their little slice of wilderness. But as the hours ticked by and the fire burned down to embers, a feeling of unease began to creep in. Emily was the first to notice. She had always been sensitive to her surroundings, and tonight she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced around nervously, her eyes searching the darkness beyond the firelight. "Do you guys feel that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Jake replied, poking at the dying fire with a stick. Like we're not alone," Emily said, her eyes wide. Sarah chuckled. "Come on, Em. Don't start with the ghost stories already. We're out here to relax, remember?" Emily forced a smile but couldn't shake the sensation. She pulled her jacket tighter around her and moved closer to the fire, trying to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The next day was spent hiking and exploring the beautiful forest. They marveled at the towering trees, the crystal-clear streams, and the abundance of wildlife. By the time they returned to their campsite, they were exhausted but exhilarated, their earlier unease forgotten. As night fell once again, the friends gathered around the fire, their spirits high. They cooked a hearty meal, shared a few drinks, and played card games under the stars. It was a perfect night, or so it seemed. Around midnight, just as they were about to call it a night, they heard it. A distant, eerie howl that sent shivers down their spines. The group fell silent, straining to hear more. Moments later, there was another sound, this time closer. The unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. "Did you hear that?" Ben asked, his eyes wide with fear. "Yeah," Alex replied, his voice tense. "It sounded like footsteps." "Probably just an animal," Jake said, trying to sound confident, but his nervous glance toward the trees betrayed him. Sarah stood up, her flashlight in hand. "Let's just check it out. Maybe it's nothing." The group reluctantly agreed, grabbing their flashlights and heading into the darkness. The beams of light cut through the thick forest, casting eerie shadows on the trees. They moved slowly, their senses heightened, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs putting them on edge. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. It was clear now that they were being followed, but by whom or what they couldn't tell. Panic set in and they turned back toward the campsite, their pace quickening. Just as they broke through the tree line and into the clearing, they saw it, a dark figure standing by their tents. It was tall and gaunt, its face obscured by a hood. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching them. Fear gripped them, and for a moment no one moved. Then, as if in a trance, Emily stepped forward. "Who are you? What do you want?" she called out, her voice shaking. The figure remained silent, its head tilting slightly as if studying them. Sarah grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her back. "Don't go near it." Without warning, the figure turned and disappeared into the forest, moving with an unnatural speed. The friends stood frozen, their minds racing. What had they just seen? Was it a person or something else entirely? They decided it was too dangerous to stay the night. Quickly, they packed up their essentials, leaving the tents and less important items behind. The journey back to their car was a blur of fear and adrenaline, every sound in the forest making them jump. When they finally reached the car and sped away, relief washed over them. They drove in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, trying to make sense of what had happened. But deep down, they knew they had encountered something beyond their understanding. The following week, back in the safety of their homes, the group tried to move on from the terrifying experience. They spoke less frequently, the shared trauma creating a rift between them. Emily, however, couldn't let it go. She needed answers. She began researching the history of the area, hoping to find some explanation for the figure they had seen. What she discovered sent chills down her spine. The forest where they had camped was notorious for strange disappearances and sightings of a mysterious figure. Locals called it the Watcher, a ghostly presence that stalked those who ventured too deep into the woods. Emily shared her findings with the others, their initial skepticism turning to horror as she recounted the stories she had uncovered. They realized they had come face to face with something ancient and malevolent, a presence that had been watching them all along. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal, though the memory of that night never fully faded. One evening, Emily received a call from Jake. His voice was frantic. "Emily, you need to come over. Now." Confused and worried, Emily rushed to Jake's apartment. When she arrived, she found him pale and shaking, holding a crumpled piece of paper. He handed it to her without a word. It was a note, written in a shaky hand. "I've been watching you. You can't escape." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The Watcher hadn't stayed in the woods, it had followed them home. Desperate to protect themselves, they contacted the authorities and a local paranormal investigator. The investigator performed a cleansing ritual and advised them to stay together, believing that their combined energy might ward off the entity. Despite their efforts, the sense of being watched never completely left. They lived in constant fear, always looking over their shoulders, knowing that the Watcher could be anywhere, waiting. The once strong bond between friends was now a fragile thread, held together by shared terror and the hope that one day they might truly escape the unseen eyes that haunted their every step. The camping trip that was supposed to be a peaceful retreat had turned into a nightmare that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The forest had given them more than just a scare. It had marked them, making them part of its dark and twisted lore. And no matter where they went, they would always feel the presence of the Watcher, a reminder of the terror that lurked just beyond the light. Jenna was excited. Her parents were going away for the weekend, and for the first time she would have the house all to herself. At 17, she was more than capable of handling a couple of nights alone. She had already planned a quiet weekend filled with her favorite movies, junk food, and maybe a FaceTime call with her best friend Emily. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" her mother asked for the 100th time as they loaded the car. "Yes, Mom, I'll be fine," Jenna assured her, trying to hide her impatience. "You guys go and have fun." Her father gave her a hug. "Just remember to lock all the doors and windows, and don't forget to set the alarm." "Got it, Dad," she said, waving them off as they drove away. As the taillights disappeared down the street, Jenna felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She closed the door and locked it, the first of many precautions she would take over the next 2 days. The first evening was peaceful. Jenna made herself a bowl of popcorn and settled on the couch to binge-watch her favorite TV series. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. She told herself it was just the house settling, though the noises made her a bit uneasy. Around 10 p.m., she decided to call Emily. They chatted about school, boys, and their upcoming summer plans. "Are you sure you're okay being alone?" Emily asked, echoing Jenna's mother's concern. "Yes, I'm fine. It's kinda nice, actually. Just me and my Netflix," Jenna replied with a laugh. After hanging up, Jenna checked all the doors and windows again, ensuring everything was secure. She set the alarm and headed upstairs to her room. Sleep came quickly, and her first night alone passed without incident. The next day was uneventful. Jenna spent most of it lounging around, doing a bit of homework, and texting friends. As night fell, she noticed the wind picking up outside, rustling the trees and howling around the corners of the house. It added an eerie quality to the already quiet neighborhood. She settled in for another night of movies, but around 9 p.m. she received a strange text from an unknown number. "Hello, Jenna." She stared at the message, puzzled. Who would be texting her from an unknown number? She decided to ignore it, thinking it was just a wrong number. Minutes later, another text arrived. "I can see you." Her heart raced. This wasn't funny. She quickly texted back, "Who is this?" There was no response. Jenna felt a chill run down her spine. She checked the locks again, ensuring everything was secure. She even peeked through the blinds but saw nothing unusual. As she tried to calm herself down, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a picture message. With trembling hands, she opened it. It was a photo of her house taken from the street. She dialed Emily's number, her voice shaking. "Emily, I think someone's outside my house." "What? Are you serious? Call the police." Jenna hung up and immediately dialed 911. The operator assured her that a patrol car would be sent to check on her. She felt a little better knowing help was on the way. 15 minutes later, she saw the flashing lights of a police car outside. She ran to the door and opened it, greeting the two officers. "Are you Jenna?" one of them asked. "Yes, I got these creepy texts and a photo of my house," she explained, showing them her phone. The officers took a look around the property but found no signs of anyone. They assured Jenna that they would patrol the area and keep an eye out for anything suspicious. "Thank you," she said, feeling somewhat reassured. After the officers left, Jenna locked the door again and double-checked the alarm. She decided to sleep on the couch in the living room, feeling safer there than upstairs. Jenna fell asleep with the TV on, trying to keep her mind off the unsettling events. Sometime in the middle of the night, she woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like a faint tapping, almost like someone knocking lightly on a window. She sat up, her heart pounding. The house was dark, the TV now showing the screensaver. She strained to listen, but the tapping had stopped. Maybe she had imagined it. Just as she was about to lie back down, she heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Jenna grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. She cautiously moved towards the source of the noise, which seemed to be coming from the back of the house. As she approached the kitchen, the tapping grew louder. She stopped at the back door, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. The tapping was persistent now, almost frantic. With a deep breath, she threw open the door, shining the flashlight outside. Nothing. The backyard was empty, the night still and silent. She stepped outside, looking around. Just as she was about to go back in, she noticed something on the ground near the door. A note weighed down by a small rock. She picked it up, her hand shaking. The note was hastily scrawled and read, "Let me in." Jenna's blood ran cold. She bolted back inside, locking the door behind her. She ran to the front of the house, intending to call the police again. As she reached for her phone, it buzzed with another message. "Look behind you." She froze, the hairs on her neck standing up. Slowly, she turned around, the flashlight shaking in her hand. In the darkness of the living room, she saw it, a shadowy figure standing by the window watching her. Her scream caught in her throat as the figure moved closer. She dropped her phone and bolted up the stairs, locking herself in her bedroom. She could hear the figure pounding on the door downstairs, the wood splintering under the force. Jenna grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, trying to barricade herself in. She dialed 911 again, her fingers trembling so much she could barely hit the buttons. "Please hurry," she whispered into the phone. He's inside." The operator's voice was calm, telling her to stay on the line, and that help was on the way. Jenna could hear the intruder moving through the house, the sound of footsteps growing closer. She backed away from the door, clutching the phone to her chest. The footsteps stopped outside her room. She held her breath, praying that the police would arrive in time. The doorknob rattled. Then the door shook as the intruder tried to force it open. Jenna screamed, holding the chair in place. The door splintered and cracked, but held firm for the moment. She could hear the sirens in the distance, growing closer. The intruder pounded on the door with renewed vigor, the wood starting to give way. Just as the door began to break apart, she heard the police burst into the house downstairs. "Up here! Help!" Jenna screamed, her voice hoarse with terror. The intruder stopped and she heard him moving away. She stayed huddled in the corner of her room, listening to the sounds of the police searching the house. Minutes felt like hours. But finally, an officer called out to her. "It's safe now, Jenna. You can come out." She slowly opened the door, the chair clattering to the floor. The police were everywhere, their flashlights illuminating the once dark house. An officer took her hand and led her downstairs. "We found him," the officer said, his tone serious. "He was trying to escape through the back. You're safe now." Jenna nodded, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe it was over. In the weeks that followed, Jenna tried to return to normal life, but the fear lingered. She learned that the intruder was a deranged man who had been stalking her for weeks, planning the night he would break into her home. He had been watching her, studying her routines, and waiting for the perfect moment. Despite the police's assurances, Jenna never felt truly safe again. The sense of security she once had in her own home was shattered, replaced by a constant sense of dread. She moved in with her grandparents, unable to stay in the house where the terror had unfolded. The experience left her scarred, her dreams haunted by the memory of that shadowy figure. And though she tried to move on, the fear remained, a permanent reminder of the night she was truly alone and faced the darkness that lurks just beyond the door. The heavy snow outside cast an eerie silence over the neighborhood, muffling all sounds and leaving an unsettling calm in its wake. Lily peered out the window of her family's two-story home, watching as the last few flakes of the evening fell to the ground. The sky was an inky black and the streetlights flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the deserted street. Lily's parents had left for a weekend getaway, assuring her that she would be perfectly fine on her own. At 18, she was used to taking care of herself, but something about this night felt different. There was an unusual stillness in the air, as if the entire world was holding its breath. With a sigh, she locked the front door, making sure it was secure, and double-checked the windows. Satisfied that everything was locked up tight, she settled onto the couch with a bowl of popcorn and her favorite horror movie queued up on the TV. The irony wasn't lost on her, watching a horror movie while being home alone on a night like this. The movie was halfway through when she heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. She paused the film, her heart beginning to race. The tapping continued, growing slightly louder. It was coming from the direction of the back door. Lily stood up slowly, clutching the remote as if it could somehow protect her. She strained to listen, the tapping now echoing through the silent house. Taking a deep breath, she tiptoed towards the kitchen where the back door was located. The tapping persisted, becoming more insistent with each passing second. She reached the kitchen, her pulse thudding in her ears. The back door was just a few feet away and the tapping was clearer now, more distinct. It wasn't the wind or a tree branch. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was knocking. Swallowing her fear, she flicked on the back porch light and peered through the curtains. The yard was empty, the freshly fallen snow undisturbed. She hesitated, then slowly unlocked the door and opened it a crack, peering out into the night. Nothing. There was no one there. A shiver ran down her spine as she closed and locked the door again. Maybe it was just her imagination, or perhaps an animal. Trying to shake off the unease, she returned to the living room and resumed her movie. Barely 10 minutes had passed when her phone buzzed, making her jump. She picked it up, expecting a text from one of her friends, but the message was from an unknown number. "Did you like the tapping?" Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. How could someone know? Who could be doing this? Her first thought was to call her parents, but they were hours away and she didn't want to worry them. Instead, she decided to text back. "Who is this?" Almost immediately, another message arrived. "Come to the window." Her heart pounded as she turned to look at the living room window. She slowly approached, her hands trembling, and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. There, standing in the snow, was a figure. They were dressed in dark clothes, a hood pulled up to obscure their face. The figure waved slowly, almost mockingly, before disappearing into the darkness. Lily's first instinct was to call the police. She dialed 911, her voice shaking as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. The operator assured her that a patrol car would be sent immediately and advised her to stay inside with the doors locked. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, every creak and groan of the house amplified by her fear. She tried to stay calm, telling herself that the police would be there soon. But the tapping started again, louder this time, coming from the front door. She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. The porch light flickered, casting shadows across the figure standing there. It was the same person, their face still hidden, knocking rhythmically on the door. Lily backed away, her mind racing. The police would be here any minute. She just had to hold on. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. There was a brief silence, then the sound of footsteps moving around the house. She heard the back door rattle, then the windows. Whoever it was, they were trying to find a way in. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "Let me in, Lily." She could barely breathe. How did they know her name? Panic surged through her as she ran upstairs, hoping to put more distance between herself and the intruder. She locked herself in her bedroom and grabbed a heavy lamp, the closest thing to a weapon she could find. The footsteps were louder now, moving through the house with purpose. She heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open downstairs. They were inside. Lily's mind raced. She had to hide. She crawled under her bed, pulling the covers down to hide herself. She lay there, every nerve on edge, listening to the intruder's progress through the house. The footsteps reached the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing in her ears. They were getting closer, ascending slowly, methodically. She clutched the lamp, ready to strike if necessary. Her phone buzzed again, startling her. She quickly silenced it, but not before reading the message. "I'm upstairs." She heard the floorboards creak just outside her room. The door handle rattled, then turned slowly. She held her breath, the lamp trembling in her grasp. The door opened with a low groan. She could see the shadow of the intruder's feet moving towards the bed. The footsteps stopped right next to her hiding place. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud and frantic in her ears. The shadow didn't move, and for a moment she wondered if they knew she was there. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder and closer. The shadow shifted, then moved away from the bed. She heard the footsteps retreat down the stairs. She stayed hidden, too terrified to move, until she heard the police shouting downstairs. "This is the police. Come out with your hands up." Slowly, she crawled out from under the bed, her legs shaking. She made her way downstairs where the police were searching the house. The front door was wide open and snow was blowing in. One of the officers approached her. "Are you okay? Did you see where they went?" Lily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "They were in my room. I think they heard the sirens and ran." The officer nodded, his expression serious. "We'll find them. In the meantime, you're safe now." The police conducted a thorough search of the house and the surrounding area, but found no trace of the intruder. They assured Lily that they would continue to patrol the neighborhood and keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. Lily's parents returned the next morning, their faces pale with worry. They hugged her tightly, grateful that she was safe. They decided to install a security system and cameras around the house to prevent anything like this from happening again. But for Lily, the fear lingered. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the corner reminded her of that night. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in her own home. She never found out who the intruder was or why they had targeted her. The messages stopped, but the memory of that shadowy figure standing in the snow, waving at her, haunted her dreams. Lily learned to live with the fear, but the sense of security she once had was gone forever. The silent watcher had left a mark on her soul, a reminder that sometimes the real monsters are the ones who hide in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.